I know what you are thinking. Baby bird hive mind. My brain contains your brain. Is we getting civil war? Is we getting national collapse? Is we getting it Tuesday? It's Monday, and so we're getting down to it. No, probably not. I saw the Democrats were like alluding to this, talking about this. Tim Walz was trying to like pour a little bit of gas on this. Other Democrat figures alluding to this kind of like freaking civil war, epic resistance rhetoric. It is obviously not going to be the case. However, I still want to like break this down and intellectualize it a little bit just so that we can give everybody permission to like, you know, continue taking victory laps, celebrate the demoralization of these people. I mean, look at Friday night. It was really popping off. By Sunday night, it is not so much popping off. By Monday, I have not even been monitoring the situation, but it's not obvious to me that there's even a situation to monitor. I mean, you know, ICE is just going in there, arresting people, continuing out their operations as they have the popular mandate and backing of the federal government to do. So everything seems to more or less be fine. But we will talk a little bit about that, why this is not going to be freaking resistance, civil war, national divorce, whatever flavor of like online fantasizing you would like to indulge in. I'm going to tell you why that is stupid and unproductive, why that is not at all similar to the American Civil War, our war of northern aggression, as some might even call it. So we'll talk about that. And then I want to talk about women being annoying, since really everything we're seeing happening in Minneapolis, it could be argued this all just goes back to Eden, right? And so we will talk a little bit about, I think Lila Rose had like some take where she was being, and I know that for Lila Rose, this is sort of like a rare instance, but she was actually wrong about this. You're just going to have to believe me. I'll play the video for you. We can talk about that. And then there was also this video I saw of this woman who was like recording a guy on a date and like grilling him epic TikTok style about his politics. And so we're going to bring in producer Blake also on this fine Monday morning to complain about women on the internet, because why would we not, right? What could bring men together more so than acknowledging sort of the temperament and interesting behaviors of the gentle sex? So we will do all of that. And then maybe we'll even do more. I'm not even going to tell you. You're going to just have to stick around and watch. So, okay, stick around and watch. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the John Doyle Show. We're going to get started on Monday in a very promising way by complaining about women and how they choose to conduct themselves on the internet. And so we are, of course, bringing in Paint Go In Harder Blake, who is our producer, who is a great tweeter, a great poster. I mentioned this, I think, on Friday. The guy's just always just putting fire down range. I mean, like when I'm on Twitter, I'm trying to be maybe sometimes serious, maybe sometimes a little not serious. Every time I see a tweet from producer Blake, it is always just like, these people are evil. Tim Walz, we're going to eat you. Thomas Massey, you homosexual. I know what you did to the elephant. Like, it's just always just, you know, just putting fire down range. Guy's just a volume shooter, as it were. So anyway, producer Blake, welcome back to the John Doyle Show. It's great to have you on, big guy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here. And, you know, in terms of going hard in the paint, it's really always been that way. I remember our good friend, our mutual friend, DC, made fun of me one time for essentially just shooting tweets out into the void when I had like 800 followers. A little subtle dig, you know, it happens and it's understandable. But you know what? Those paid in dividends. I'm now up to 3,000 and I routinely... Thomas Massey is probably my biggest target, but I love going after Tim Walz. I love specifically saying, we will not let you get away with what you did to that horse in the 80s. We all remember what you did to that horse in the 80s.
And we do, and it can't happen. It can't happen. He can't get away with what happened to the horse, which I don't know if we can discuss that in detail. Sometimes, you know, you don't want to let the enemy know exactly what you know, but we will be achieving justice for that horse and for other animals on the sort of on the farm. But yeah, I want to play this video. You know, one of the things that I appreciate about your timeline is the extent to which you call out, you know, the panicans rather, and just this like performative nonsense activism that gets nobody anywhere. So I know that you saw this video. I saw this video. Let's go ahead and take a look at Lila Rose, who, for those unfamiliar, she is an extremely well-known pro-life activist. She does a lot of great work for the pro-life cause, but occasionally, you know, we have some takes like this, which are less than productive, we'll say. So let's play the clip.
Always Forever says the thing is they could have shot at the tires. They are trained to avoid killing citizens. She was trying to get away. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And the law enforcement, ICE, should be trained to avoid killing people. That is not their job to kill people. Their job is to protect the peace, enforce the law, obviously practice self-defense when needed, but it's not to just go out and kill people. So I think, you know, the jury's still out on this one. There's going to be more forensic analysis that's going to be done of this case, but I think it's a tragedy all in all. And
like, what are you talking? What do you mean there's a lot of truth to that? Not just like a little bit of truth. There's like a lot of truth to that. The jury is not still out. We all saw the video. We all saw the same video. Maybe you tuned into like mainstream news that was lying about the video and thus did not show the video. But I don't understand how you can exist like in the sphere when everybody was talking about this. The second that video came out, everybody was sharing it. JD Vance, the vice president, shared the video. Like what are you even talking about? And by the way, this is the same woman who, when George Floyd died, was waxing poetic about how tragic it was. I think she even wept, if I recall correctly. I think she actually wept tears when George Floyd died. And so again, it's like, you know, we can all make mistakes. We can all be wrong about some things. But when you're going to be a person, you know, involved in the sphere, you kind of do have to have better instincts about these things. And if you don't have good instincts about these things, you're going to lead people in an unproductive direction, which is ultimately going to get us like all killed. Maybe it's time to put down the microphone, you know, to spend a little bit less time telling us that our reaction to a patriot having his life not only threatened, like his life was on the line. I mean, he had a vehicle being driven towards him. We all saw what happened. Shot went through the front window. What is that called? The shield of wind, as it were. And so it was obviously justified. You know, we're relitigating something that is settled science at this point.
Yeah, my thoughts exactly. I mean, look, I'm perhaps less forgiving towards these people than maybe I should be. But as you said, you know, when you display a total lack of political je ne sais quoi, of strategy, of intellect, you know, I don't forgive these people. I don't think they should. I wish people would stop listening to them. I wish people would stop platforming them. Look, go back to 2024. Lila Rose was one of my least favorite people at the time because of her counter signaling of President Trump, that he wasn't pro-life enough on the issue. She was deliberately helping Kamala Harris win. Now, people like to argue like, oh, well, not voting or sitting out from voting isn't the same as voting Democrat. Yes, it is. You are helping Kamala Harris win, and you claim to be pro-life. She is the most pro-abortion candidate in the world. President Trump is the only person who has done anything for your movement ever. You're a grifter. You're making your money. You're running your NGO. You're going to your galas. You're not helping. Donald Trump is more pro-life than you. I am more pro-life than you, because to be pro-life, you have to be like smart. You have to know how to actually get what you want done. That is voting for Trump. She didn't vote for, well, I'm not going to say that. Maybe she did. Maybe she came around in the end, but she was encouraging her followers not to vote for Trump. She was being disloyal, right, and she's being, you know, not intelligent right now. Maybe it's a ploy to, maybe she thinks the left will eat her last if she goes after American hero Jonathan Ross and said that he did anything wrong when he got almost run over by a left-wing domestic terrorist.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is like a lot of people who are involved in the pro-life cause, they are not just pro-life in the sense that they're like anti-abortion. They literally are pro-life as it exists in any form, which is to say also like people who are trying to kill our ICE patriots. And they're saying, well, it's a tragedy that this woman lost her life. Dude, is that the word we would use to describe what just happened? A tragedy? Like, I don't know. And yeah, to your point, it's like Donald Trump, you know, these are the same kinds of people, these like sort of like podcast Christian women types who, I love podcasters, I love Christians, I love women. Nobody arguably loves those three categories more than myself. Not even to get into my level of respect for those three categories. But if you've got like things like this happening, there are people like that who, you know, wanted to come out and discuss Donald Trump's temperament, and he has a problem with women, and he said this comment, I'm Megyn Kelly, blah, blah, blah. Donald Trump's temperament, obviously, he'll sometimes, you know, gem out a little bit on the timeline. But this is a guy who is still forgiving and gracious enough to award victories to causes which have actively tried to subvert the success of his movement. If you're Donald Trump and you're coming out and you're saying, hey, sorry, but it's like political suicide for me to endorse a national abortion ban, so unfortunately I can't do that. However, hey, I gave you the pro-life stuff, right? I mean, I've read every book on the like YAF recommended reading list about how we have to overturn Roe v. Wade. Once that happens, then the movement can come in at the state level. Dude, has that happened though? It's been 3 years, and I don't know what these people have really done to advance that cause other than like try to make things difficult for Trump and say, well, now we actually want you to do this, even though we said we just needed to get it back to the states. Now we want you to endorse a national ban, which would cause you to not even win the election, and then that would cause Democrats to get in. And of course, we all know what they would do in terms of governing pertaining to that issue. So it's like, what are we doing there when we're going to try actively to go out of our way to make it more difficult for Trump to get elected, and Trump still gets in office and he still delivers victories to Christians, delivers victories to the pro-life cause, even though they've demonstrated not only that they are willing to work against him if they don't get what they want, which is bad politics. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to, you know, exercise a little bit more prudence. Not only that, but they are proving that they're not actually as electorally necessary as they would like to portray themselves to be. This is not the 1970s and 80s anymore when you've got like these, big televangelist figures who are rallying everybody. Conservative Christians chose Donald Trump over Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz was the guy saying Donald Trump is vulgar. He has New York values, which is to say he's not a polished, epic Christian conservative like me, Chungus moral man number 7. And evangelicals have been one of Trump's most loyal blocks, despite the fact that, he does obviously care about Christian issues. Even, with the stuff going on in Nigeria, it's sort of an international crusade, one might even say. He's willing to do that, but he does not make that as central to his campaign and to his politics as someone like Ted Cruz obviously has. And so even the Christian evangelicals seem to support a guy like Trump over a guy like Cruz. They obviously chose Trump over Cruz. And so what that's showing to, sort of Republican Party, infrastructure is that, hey, if you're the pro-life cause, we actually don't even have to really listen to you. And you can do this kind of like online posturing and say that, we're going to withhold our vote and you're not going to win. And then it turns out we do actually win and we don't listen to you. So if I'm a guy who is not Donald the Merciful, I'm going to look at that and say, screw you. I don't need you. Clearly, you don't have the influence that you thought you did. You're making my life more difficult. And yeah, I'm a human being and I like, getting even. And Trump, because he understands, like, he wants to do the right thing. He obviously is a Christian. This is a guy who's still willing to provide to them those victories, which does demonstrate a kind of like grace and, a forgiving, merciful spirit, which these people would not ascribe to him. And I just think that kind of conduct is disgusting, especially to your point. These people are collecting salaries in the like several hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to do what? Donald Trump and his New York values delivered to you your victories. What is your output? What is your export? What is your contribution to the movement except for like bad takes and photo op galas? Like what are we doing here?
Dude, it's almost like you could say that they held a grudge against him exactly for getting Roe v. Wade overturned because he took away like their one punching bag that they could go after, that they could raise all this money with. And you're exactly right. Since then, there has been little to nothing going on. It's the abolitionists. They call themselves the abolitionists who were, very rowdy online during 2024, actively campaigning against President Trump. And I asked these people, what are you doing? There's this one guy in particular who lived in Pennsylvania. He said, I'm not voting for Trump because he won't institute a full-blown nationwide abortion ban. Pennsylvania, important swing state. I'm like, hey, Pennsylvania abortion is very legal, pretty sure up until birth. What are you doing in your hometown? Why are you not working there? Why are you trying to sabotage us at the federal level and get Kamala Harris elected and get, millions of more babies killed? But, going back to this particular point that Lila Rose is making, she's no combat expert. She's no law enforcement expert. She has no idea. Steven Crowder, this guy, he did a little, let's say, a remake of the situation where he placed himself in front of a moving vehicle just as close as Jonathan Ross was to this domestic terrorist who tried to run him over. And, just to see if he, from his angle, were able to even see the wheels, know if the wheels were turning or if they were just headed right in his direction. Obviously, from that angle, what does she think this is, a Marvel movie? She thinks he can jump to both sides and shoot the tires. It's just unbelievable. I don't know where these people, they don't operate within the bounds of reality.
Yeah, like, honestly, who are you to say that? Like, who are you to make that call? Again, it's easy when all your job, is, which I understand, like, the irony of me saying this right now, but your job is to either, like, sit at a desk and talk into a microphone or go to a gala and talk into a microphone. All it is talk. And talk is helpful sometimes if you're trying to orient people in a good direction, something that's productive. But if you're just talking for the only purpose being vanity and about how you're so convicted and you have all these beliefs and everybody else is less pure than I am and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, who are you to make that call? Dude, this guy is making, I don't even know how much, like an ICE agent's salary, which I'm sure is good. Go join ICE. But maybe it's not hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, black car service, 4-star hotels. Maybe it's not quite at that level. This guy's putting his life on the line in the general sense that any police officer is doing. Now you scale that to the fact that ICE is, like, in the left's mind, the modern iteration of, like, the Gestapo. This is a guy who Democrats are already saying, hey, there's no statute of limitations on this. We're going to investigate this when we get back into power. This guy's been doxxed by mainstream journalists. He's had his life. The state of his future is completely up in the air, even if patriots are rallying behind this guy, giving him money, Give, Send, Go, or GoFundMe or whatever. Like, this guy's not safe. He has a bounty on his head that has been endorsed by the left. And so yeah, it's not exactly helpful for you to be pro-life and then like assist in the sort of sentiment that's going to like try to get this guy killed, and then say, well, he should have just shot at the tires. He should have done this. Why? Why do we owe someone trying to run us over with a car courtesy, the courtesy of going for the tire? And I don't know if you know this, but it's this like crazy thing. If you pop the tires of a car, it can still actually move forward, especially when it's already being driven. So it's not like, yeah, a video game where you shoot the tires in the car, just like, and just like stop, like flips over him like the semi in The Dark Knight, and he just like is under it watching it and just like clears and lands. And then, yeah, this like stupid like lesbian just gets out of the car. You know, how the Joker's like stumbling. Remember when he gets out of the truck and he's like, you know, just firing off the gun or whatever? That's her with her like, you know, iPhone or whatever. That is like in Lila Rose's mind, that is like what should have happened had this guy been a little bit more gracious, a little bit more pro of life, and not just like, you know, got a shot off in this woman's head. Which I don't mean to laugh about that in the sense that like death is funny, but that's not what I mean by that. The situation itself is absurd, and I'm tired of pretending like we're not allowed to laugh at like the absurdity of that, where it's like you have somebody who is making a religious sacrifice of themselves, abandoning children for Somali illegal aliens. Like, that's an absurd situation. That is actually kind of like a funny situation. And I don't like being tone policed about what I choose to laugh at and what I don't, because if anything, dude, a society that does not understand God and a society that places so much emphasis on life and that fears death because we're uncertain of like what is going to happen next, that's a society that is going to treat death like a very taboo subject, something that shouldn't be joked about. Whereas I'm perfectly content knowing that when I die, I will face judgment and I will be in one of two places. I guess because we're Catholic, one of three places. But like, I'm not gonna, you know, I don't take that so seriously. I'm not afraid of that. That's inevitable. And because I don't view it as like a taboo subject, like I can laugh at that. I threaten to kill myself like 30 times a day. Like this is not something that needs to be taboo. And yeah, if we're all going to die and you act in such a way that now the way that you die is by being killed for some like Somali illegal alien, and I'm not supposed to laugh at that. That's a tragedy. Is it? Is that the word we want to use? I don't know. Am I crazy?
No, not at all. And then, you know, of course, the Somalians don't show up for any of these vigils going on. They, as you said in the last video, have literally no idea what's even happening. You know, at this point, if you find yourself siding with the left basically on anything, caveat there, except for strategy, I do admire the left's strategy, and I think you should, in some regards, not in totality, but you know, for example, the way that they never turn on each other, the way that you would never see them, you know, lambasting President Biden when he was in President Brandon when he was in office. You know, they stick together. They don't attack their own because they have a better understanding of political strategy and rhetoric than we do. Maybe we should adopt that. But when you actually adopt the left stances and you agree with them on situations like this, we know the fact that they're wrong about literally everything and have been forever, especially concerning anything relating to self-defense. We saw them go after Kyle Rittenhouse. We see them defend Carmelo Anthony, saying that he got pushed, you know, that white boy was a bully, whatever. If you side with the left on any of these issues, you're simply not going to make it, and people should stop listening to you. You should not be getting money from well-meaning, beautiful-hearted conservatives out here. And Lila Rose, unfortunately, like, you know, I say it's one strike, but we're well past 3 strikes at this point. I don't see the reason for her to have much of a voice going forward.
Yeah, and the cope is that, well, it's because on the right, we actually have intellectual diversity. And dude, like that might be true in the sense that we do disagree more, or we have like more developed opinions than your average like leftist NPC. But what you're talking about, reacting, impulse, general, like, you know, unintelligent behavior, that is not the same thing as having like my opinion written down on a 3x5 and then your opinion written down on a 3x5 and then we disagree, and so we're talking in productive ways about how to reconcile our disagreements, certain inequities, if you will, but or rectify certain inequities, if you will. It's generally just like behavior that is downstream from unproductive and antisocial impulses, treachery, disagreeableness, vanity. Like that stuff certainly exists on the left, but they have found a way to do that and make it in a way that is forwarding their political project, whereas on the right, it is to simply forward like the brand, to forward the self, our sort of radical individualism, if you will. And it's obviously not productive. And I know you can attest to this. The further I get involved in politics, the more I understand exactly why we're at where we are at. And you sort of meet people and assess kind of the person they are, not even that they're like good or bad on the issues, but just like their ability to just like keep it together for 5 seconds. It doesn't exist. That's why I say there are 8 people left who get it. We had 10, we're down to 8. Gang of 8, righteous remnant. Please do not become insane because we need you. But anyway, Yeah, so we are going to take a little break here. We're going to come back and talk about the Civil War stuff, and then we'll talk more about women being insane. So, yeah, BRB. Sort of an interesting clear pill pertaining to the death of Renee Bad, where they're trying to make this something that is very animating to the left, and it's obviously successful to a certain extent, but it's not going to be as successful as other instances of like bad people like dying when interacting with police officers, simply because she's like a white woman, and you're not exactly going to get people to come out onto the streets to like more or less protest the death of a white woman. Whether that is because, you know, they do not align with her racially, or because they are like white liberals who do not view that to be as much of a tragedy as like dying from a fentanyl overdose while in police custody. So that is interesting, because on the one hand, that is good for us because the left is more demoralized. They're less able to sort of intimidate law enforcement into not doing their job. But then it's also just like indicative of like the general kind of cultural state where, yeah, if you're a white woman and you die, like no one cares, or they care like just a little bit. And of course, you saw that with the Ukrainian woman a few months ago as well, where even now, like people have more or less forgotten about that. They more or less moved on. And some of that was because days after, I mean, she was murdered. Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And so that was sort of an inconvenient timing, I guess you'd say, in that news cycle. But I just saw, too, there was a mural that was painted of her, I think, in Los Angeles, because Elon Musk and some other figures had signed on to like, okay, we're never going to forget this woman. We're going to paint murals of her in major cities throughout the country. And she's obviously like a very beautiful young woman. And so now her face is on the side of like buildings I saw. And that's great. Like, I'm happy to see that. But again, it is sort of indicative of the state that we're at, where we don't even really have the sort of like propaganda infrastructure to make that into the tragedy that it really was, right? To like understand that in the popular consciousness as a tragedy, someone knowing who that woman is, like people are going to see that face and they're just going to think it's like, you know, an advertisement for L'Oreal or something. They're not going to understand the tragedy associated with it, what needs to be done to solve it, because we're just like not in that position. You know, we can try to create our own culture. We can try to create our own art. And I understand that our well-meaning, beautiful Christian patriot hearts are driving that. But, you know, we got a long way to go, right? But in the meantime, I do want to talk about the Civil War 2.0 that we're obviously going to have, because the left is, of course, vowing to fight Trump's completely lawful deportation machine to the last sanctuary city. And this is simply not going to happen. And I want to intellectualize it a little bit just to like let them know that, yeah, there's absolutely no shot they're getting out of this, because not only are we going to enforce the law, normal people are just going to kind of allow us to do it. And it's going to be really cool. You know, I like seeing social media. I like going on social media and seeing like my normie friends going about their lives, posting their Instagram stories. And I like seeing that because I know for a fact that all like the theater kids, all the leftists are seeing the normal conduct of people and they're seething about it. They're angry because normal people just aren't freaking waking up. And that makes me quite happy, because now the shoe is on the other foot. Yeah, how do you like it when the people won't just freaking wake up and understand like that society is crumbling? Except when we talk about it, society is actually crumbling. And when you talk about it, you're just like completely retarded. So yeah, we're going to mog the theater kids a little bit, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about the shooting, I guess. We'll expose the just, you know, empty Civil War rhetoric from the left. We'll talk a little bit about 1861. We'll debunk the kind of online fantasizing you see, whether it's Civil War, national divorce, all that nonsense. So pertaining to the shooting, obviously last Wednesday, there was a team of ICE agents raiding a heavily Somalian neighborhood in Minneapolis, targeting, of course, these like illegal Somali aliens who were suspected of being like in gangs, as they do, I suppose. And then protesters from this local activist group gathered outside after, of course, they, you know, spread the word on social media. Among them is Renee Bad, who is this 37-year-old white lady. She is a career political activist. She basically arrives with her like lesbian partner lady to obstruct the operation. And so agents are out there, they're executing raids, they're doing their job. And then Renee Bad attempts to block them with her car. And video evidence has now shown not only was she doing that, she was like dancing in happiness and she was smirking at these agents who are trying to just do their jobs, who are trying to ask her to leave. And then, of course, she like spurgs out, tries to run over Agent Patriot Jonathan Ross with her vehicle. And Ross is obviously like, hey, you can't do that. And so he pulls out his gun and he lets a shot off. And then her head just like does that. And then she dies. And then protesters are like shrieking in dismay at ICE having done a freaking murder. And then, of course, this video is released on social media. It goes viral. Everybody freaks out. Now there are protests and agents are being swarmed, intimidated. Again, you've seen this all. So Tim Walz comes out and he threatens to kind of like activate the National Guard. He seems to be hinting that he's going to use them to further obstruct ICE operations in the state. Then you had the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, indignantly drop a freaking F-bomb and tell ICE to freaking get the F out. And then the next day, you know, even more liberals are showing up. They're clashing with ICE. They're thinking that they can operate with impunity. And this spreads nationwide, right? You saw in Portland, you've got more protesters clashing with federal agents outside ICE facilities, leading, of course, to 2 more shootings, this time of Venezuelan gangbangers. I think there was a Venezuelan dude. He had like a prostitute with him or something, and they ended up dying. New York City, you've seen this as well. You know, activists are calling for an end to ICE in these demonstrations downtown. You've got these smaller clashes kind of taking place across the country. All of this like rage is boiling over downstream from ICE actually executing these deportation operations. And this, of course, is not happening in a vacuum. You know, this surge in deportations comes from the Trump administration deploying thousands of ICE agents across the country, whether it's major cities like Los Angeles to even upstate New York, small towns, right? Like no matter where you look, ICE is going to be there and they're going to be executing these deportation operations, which of course they have the popular mandate to do. They're completely allowed to do legally. Everybody knows this, right? However, you are also going to see where you see ICE agents, these protests, these efforts to impede these operations, and you're going to have these like, you know, ignorant, violent, just generally excitable activists attempting to fight these deportations while decrying, you know, the fascism of enforcing existing immigration law, right? And with Trump having hired thousands of new ICE agents across the country, courtesy of the funding he got from the one big, beautiful bill, which curiously some really based people opposed for some reason. In the wake of all this, of course, liberals have become even more hysterical and emboldened because, as we know, when you back these people into a corner, they tend to spurg out a little bit, which can be violent. So you have to kind of keep the pressure on. Otherwise, you're going to get nipped. So this shooting of Renee Bad seems to have lit a fire under the left in a way that we haven't really seen since J6 probably. I mean, J6, of course, was even after like the Floyd riots, the Summer of Love. They really have become animated in a way that I haven't seen in the last 5 years probably because of these deportation efforts, which I've been told aren't even happening. Because within hours of this news breaking, you had these like Democrat figures on every network, right? Every mainstream media network, they were tweeting. All of them were framing her death as, you know, this is the opening shot in some kind of like new war against freaking fascism, against, you know, the freaking Imperial Army or whatever, like Marvel or Star Wars or whatever, like whatever piece of pop media they are viewing their existence through, right? And so, of course, all these media outlets were amplifying the hysteria. You had CNN running segments on this like supposed uprising with like experts warning of widespread civil unrest. Politicians, of course, were getting in on this, like Tim Walz alluding again to using the Minnesota National Guard to hashtag resist deportations. He's since like cucked on this because that's all it is, right? It's intoxicating rhetoric. It is trying to give the appearance of doing something when they're going to have to completely surrender to the Trump administration and to the federal government, which is awesome. You should be white-pilled about that. And that's all it is. They are trying to give gibs to their activist base, right? Like social media is going to buzz with these fantasies of strikes, you know, armed occupations of federal buildings, underground networks, smuggling migrants across state lines, like the freaking Underground Railroad. Like you're going to have people comparing ICE to Gestapo. They're going to talk about, and they have talked about, why it is like a moral good to hunt these people down and to kill them, which of course is why we have to throw our weight behind these ICE patriots and let them know that we stand with them unequivocally. And more than a few people even expressed that they actually would have loved if Renee Bad did kill the ICE agent, which is like the big thing. It's not that they're upset that somebody died. They're simply upset that the person who died was not the ICE agent. So, and they wanted it to sound like the prelude to something like actually big, this like real event and this real energy that could be absorbed by some kind of political machine so that they could finally freaking stand up and resist. And we could have our civil war. We could stand up to authoritarianism, secession, whatever. Except that is simply not going to happen because all these people do is like complain and cry and bark. They rarely bite. When they bite, it's because they have control of the federal government, or it's, you know, one of those asymmetrical situations where they incite a kind of lone actor through media propaganda and you get a tragedy from that. But in terms of like this kind of mass civil unrest translating into something that is victorious or triumphant for the left, it's not going to happen. And first we have to talk about the practical realities behind it. I don't even mean necessarily to get into the fact that these people are like old. I mean, you look at the people who are showing up to these events. These are not your revolutionary class. You obviously have these like terror cells. I know that they train, they should be broken up, they should be RICO'd, they should be put under the jail. But if you are talking about a kind of like freaking mass uprising secession scenario, civil war, national divorce, whatever you want to call it, you do have the urban dependence factor, which is going to cause lots of problems. You've got leftist strongholds, obviously, in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. These are pretty like fragile ecosystems that are reliant upon, you know, timely supply chains, whether it's food, fuel, power. Like a real civil war kind of situation would, of course, mean blockades and shortages and blackouts. And history tends to show that like urbanites are going to fold under that kind of pressure, especially the class of urbanite that we're dealing with now, who are people who, again, all have mental disorders. What's going to happen when the supply chains break for SSRIs? What happens when the supply chain breaks for like HRT, when they're like hormones, when they are, you know, pruning themselves out? It's going to be like in the fourth Harry Potter movie when Mad Eye Moody like runs out of the polyjuice potion and he starts like violently shaking and morphing back into whoever the guy was. Like that's what's going to happen when, you know, the transgender population in these urban areas are not able to get their hormones right. They're just going to start like just like morphing back into their sex assigned at birth, which, you know, is not exactly going to make for combat effectiveness, right? And we saw in 2020, you know, we had riots. We obviously were burning down major cities. This lasted for months in some cases. Ultimately, that died out. And as much as I would like it to have been because of police crackdown, it really wasn't. They just like got tired. They just like went home. You know, exhaustion from constant outrage is a real thing, especially, again, when you're not dealing with the usual suspects who are happy to just like burn stuff down and loot stuff or whatever. You're talking about these like angry white leftists who are not even that angry because the person who died in the first place was also just like an angry white leftist, even when it's their own, right? It's the heat graph, the out group. They cannot identify properly with like the death of a fellow white leftist because of their out group preference, right? So after years of COVID lockdowns, you know, economic rot, we've had like cultural wars, you know, all that stuff. The average activist in the big 2-6, I don't think has like the will to just go along with this kind of prolonged disruption. Again, we talked about this last week. Where were the riots when Trump won? In DC, there were, it wasn't as normalized, obviously, but in DC, you had, you know, cars on fire. You had all sorts of like riots, mass protests, the Women's March, all of this stuff going on, and Trump won. Trump 2, you just don't see it. They're just demoralized. They don't have that energy. And, you know, you compare what's going on now to even the summer of love with Floyd. Even now in Minneapolis, it's smaller, it's less energetic. They are simply less able to keep up the fight. Moreover, and of course related to that, is that law enforcement is perfectly happy to arrest these people, to like, we'll say, produce some pretty good content dealing with these people. So you're seeing it on both ends where, yeah, they're less aggrandized generally, but also law enforcement is obviously going to contribute to that demoralization by simply executing tasks, doing their job, and using force against these people to show them that, yeah, you're not that guy, you don't have that power. And that eventually does demoralize these people into retiring, we'll say, because these are not a people who are driven by a real spirit. These are people who are driven by bitterness and resentment. They are very fragile, sort of temperamentally. And so, yeah, this stuff is just going to make it even better for patriots. Then you've got the economic pressures, right? Most leftist protesters are like these middle class type professionals or like unemployed disability recipients who are, again, you know, going to be disrupted by those HRT supply lines. But, you know, these are like your teachers, your tech employees, social workers. These are people who may have mortgages. You know, they have student loans, they have 401ks. A true like mass freaking uprising of the people, that means lost jobs. That means frozen assets, ruined credit. You know, there were lawyers during the Floyd riots who lost law licenses and spent time in prison because they decided to do this epic thing where they threw a Molotov at like cop cars during the riots. Like, that is a real thing that's going to produce consequences for people. And it is not enough to simply be like against like freaking ICE or whatever. You know, they're enabled to do that when they have the buttressing of the entire political establishment and media establishment, all these social incentives compelling them towards that behavior. But absent a lot of that, they just fold, dude. And then you've got the internal divisions. You know, they are fractured along lots of lines right now. You've got the pro-Palestine types clashing with the Zionist donors. AOC even has recently adjusted some of her rhetoric. Mamdani has as well, pertaining to this stuff, which their base is not very happy about. You've got environmentalists fighting union workers about green jobs. You've got the transgender advocates alienating, you know, your J.K. Rowling feminist types. The pro-immigration crowd that rallied for Renee Bad includes also factions who hate each other just as much as maybe they hate Trump. You know, take like the 2025 stuff with Gaza. You had campus protests turning into like brawls between Muslims and Jews. Like, the unified ability of these people to act is just simply not what it used to be. They are going to fold. They are going to submit just like they always do, right? The 2025 protests against the first wave of deportations, that was like where they peaked in Trump too. They started out, they had an energy, they were big. By October, like they were down to rookie numbers, right? Poll after poll is showing Democrat voters, they talk a tough talk when it comes to resistance, but ultimately these are people who prioritize, like anyone does, economic stability when push comes to shove, you know? Exhaustion is ultimately going to win. This is a war of attrition in some ways. Like the system is just going to grind on, and the left will just go back to complaining on the internet from the couch, which is not a lifestyle I'm necessarily counter-signaling. I'm just saying, like, that is what these people are going to retreat to, because as a machine, that kind of like grassroots stuff is not built for change. That is built for spectacle, for social media points, vanity. It's not about sacrifice. Like Renee Bad was not like actually a martyr for them. That was just like another act in some kind of performance that ultimately is just going to end, you know, when these people wear themselves out. So this is a lot different from the actual American Civil War. I'm almost insulted that they would allude to this and make these comparisons, because they are not that guy. They are a far inferior stock of people compared to the Americans who lost their lives in the American Civil War. And that is one of maybe like three ghosts, the American Civil War, that's going to haunt every kind of heated political debate today. Like leftists invoke it when they want to talk about fascist uprisings. You know, they like to talk about General Sherman, of course. Right-wingers want to reference it in similar fantasies about like seceding. They don't do that so much now that like winning is possible, but this used to be very popular. And so online types on either side are going to see this as a kind of blueprint, a sort of Rorschach that they can interpret as they will for some kind of like coming apocalypse where their niche political ideology rises from the ashes and they take power, and, you know, the whole nine yards. But the real Civil War, which we actually have not discussed as much as we maybe should have throughout the years, and so maybe we will get into this more, but the real story of the American Civil War is nothing like we tell ourselves. It was obviously brutal. It was a total conflict that killed 600,000 people. It scorched entire regions of the country, and it permanently reshaped the nation in terms of the composition, in terms of the way that we understand government to work. So we have to kind of understand what really happened, I think, with that conflict, which, again, your public education is not going to do that justice. We're not even going to really do that justice today, but we do have to kind of debunk the idea that we are anywhere close to being on the verge of something similar to that, and also explain why, you know, the left's kind of posturing towards that with resistance to deportations is just going to end in very quiet and demoralized submission rather than revolution. So first, just to kind of strip away the romanticism, the war that started in 1861 was not primarily about this like abstract concept of states' rights. I know that, you know, we often do a revisionism where we talk about maybe a pro-Southern case and we'll allude to like states' rights or whatever. I really enjoy the sort of Shelby Foote take where it's like boys on the North side thought they were fighting to preserve the Union. Boys on the South side thought that they were fighting fighting the Second American Revolution. I think that's basically correct. I don't really like to get too much into this stuff just because I think it is counterproductive, similar to a lot of the like infighting you see between different denominations of Christians. I just think that we have bigger fish to fry right now, and we can put brother wars back on the menu once we solve some of our bigger problems. But I think it's also okay to acknowledge that, like, you know, at its core, the war was about slavery. I think it's actually leftist in a way to try to avoid that, because you are acknowledging like slavery as, you know, the worst freaking thing to ever happen. And so you're doing, no, it wasn't really about that. It was about this like totally other thing that how could you argue against? I'm obviously not pro-slavery. I'm just saying, like, we can talk about these things without having to, you know, like bend the knee to these kind of like modern moral understandings of things. Like, we can talk about slavery as like a thing that occurred throughout most of human history and still occurs in the world today, without having to do like a land acknowledgement where it's like, and I acknowledge that this is the worst freaking thing to have ever happened, and anyone who practiced it is freaking evil. Like, we don't have to do that. We can just like talk about things. And it is true that like the issue of slavery was a deeply moral issue that was dividing the nation. The Confederate Constitution explicitly protected the institution of slavery. Every seceding state in their declaration cited it as a grievance. You know, South Carolina's ordinance complained that northern states were not enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act. Mississippi's leaders were very blunt in saying that like their position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, which they said was the greatest material interest of the world. Like, without slavery, there's not going to be that secession, probably. There's not going to be like the resultant civil war. Like, the conflict was irreconcilable because of those two incompatible versions of America, like one built with slavery, the other built without slavery. And again, this is not to take any side right now. My position on the American Civil War has evolved throughout the years. And so again, we're not going to do it really any justice today. And people are probably even going to push back on the idea that like it was unavoidable because of slavery, which, we can have a more nuanced discussion about that. But the reason I invoke the slavery thing is to point out, which we'll get into a little bit here, is that there is not a modern iteration of that the nation feels to truly be so like morally divisive. You're not going to find people like willing to do any sort of like moral crusade truly in a mass scale and sacrifice things like livelihoods and hometowns and all of that for, protecting Somali illegal aliens. Like normal people are still on net approving ISIS operations. You're just not going to see something like that. Moreover, the Civil War itself was not some kind of like gentleman's duel. Like it was total devastation, which again, you're not going to see for something that is not genuinely a morally dividing issue, such as, enforcing federal immigration law. And then you had, of course, the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, turned it from, just being a war between brothers into this kind of like revolutionary struggle where now we're freeing slaves behind enemy lines. We're arming black soldiers against, their former masters. You had guys like, the left's favorite general, Sherman, marching through Georgia, burning plantations, burning railroads, this kind of like scorched earth campaign that just broke the will of the South in many cases. You had lots and lots of people dying from disease, from starvation, just as much as bullets in many cases. You had cities like Atlanta, Richmond, just reduced completely to rubble. The Confederacy's entire economy collapsed under blockade. And then you had inflation, of course, leaving the South basically in complete ruin for many years afterwards. And we should talk about that. We should talk about Reconstruction. But the regional identities are what fueled the fire, right? Like you had the agrarian, sort of slave-dependent Southerner. You had the industrializing, more urban Northerner. Like loyalties were geographic. They were economic. You had families divided, sure, but states were more or less mostly unified. You had desertion rates, as you will with anything, but the resolve was more or less maintained because the stakes were existential. Like you either win or you lose literally everything. Contrast that with today. Again, there is no modern moral equivalent to slavery in our like contemporary political discussions where you have something which is deeply considered to either be like the worst thing ever or the best thing ever. You just like don't see that. You've got immigration debates, like sure. But again, most like people more or less agree with the direction of the Trump administration on immigration. They don't bring to the table that kind of like absolute zero-sum passion and indignation that drove men to die by the tens of thousands at Gettysburg, not because of slavery, but because of the loyalty they had to their regions, to their cities, as a result of this conflict and, the way the federal government chose to go about it. So there is like, obviously, yes, a red-blue divide, but it's certainly not regional like was the case in 1861. So also another thing, too, is like the immigrants, because obviously, and you had the American Civil War, you had a large influx of foreigners coming into America, signing on with the North, and that was ultimately able to overwhelm the Southern military in many cases. I think it's something like, this was actually one of the more red-pilling stats I came across in pertaining to the American Civil War. You had something like 90+% of Confederate soldiers able to trace their lineage back to, pre-founding America. And then in the North, it was like half, if that. I think it was maybe even less because obviously you had, foreign conscripts coming over, a lot of Irish coming over, right? And they were signing on to fight with the Union in exchange for benefits from the, United States government. And the immigrants now seem to kind of understand that they need the system to survive. Like if the federal government is being run by our guys, it's not obvious to me that immigrants would meaningfully like resist that because they seem to kind of need the federal government. They seem to kind of be betting that the system is more or less going to preserve itself, and they're ultimately going to need that because they need free stuff, they need citizenship, et cetera. If they really believed that there was kind of some sort of, mass uprising against the freaking fascist authoritarian Trump government, that might be a different case. But right now, the energy that we're seeing is not that. I mean, you'll have like low IQ immigrant types out there resisting ICE, causing problems. It's less about some kind of like action towards a political cause in the sense of like, we need to take charge so we can do X, Y, Z. It seems to be just like everything else these people do. It's like an exercise in vanity, right? It's primarily something for people to do on social media. They make their gay little sign, they go out, and it's like, that's it. It's performative. It is signaling. It's virtue signaling. And then the divide, too, is something that's always puzzling. I mean, you've got like California, you have vast red rural counties in California that vote for Trump by landslides. But then in Texas, you've got cities like Austin, Houston. These are deeply blue strongholds. Texas is also now majority minority. So, I don't know how much longer they're going to remain a red state, hopefully for quite some time if we fix this deportation stuff or fix this immigration stuff. But federal interdependence makes the idea of secession like kind of suicidal. Like imagine New York City without like Midwestern food shipments. Illinois without coastal ports. Like the economy is too intertwined. You know, you have supply chains crossing every state line, and polls, of course, have shown that Americans oppose any form of like national divorce, which is something that we used to have to talk about every 6 weeks for like 3 years. And also, too, you know, the behavior of the activists, even insofar as they're concerned with like the social media vanity, they prioritize comfort, dude. Confederate soldiers, which is why I hate Tim Walz alluding to this idea of like, you know, resistance, like for some reason now, like alluding to like Confederate imagery or like, you know, resistance against an overbearing federal government or something. These people, first of all, have dragged the names of Confederate soldiers and Confederate heroes through the mud forever. I mean, Robert E. Lee, obviously, literally smelting down this guy's statue, removing Confederate flags from state capitals. Like, they have treated good Americans like trash forever. And now they're going to like sort of invoke the kind of Americana that they pioneered. That I find particularly offensive. And I also find offensive the suggestion that they're even at that level, like that they're even comparable to that stock of American. Like, Confederate soldiers were enduring barefoot marches, starvation rations, all for a cause that they truly believed in, for their homeland, right? Modern protesters don't believe in anything except like gay race communism. And then when the weather gets a little chilly, they just like go home. Like, every one of these, even the No Kings thing, dude, I showed up at like noon. People were leaving. They were going to their cars. They were done. They resisted. It was over. They wanted to go like watch football or something. This kind of stuff really like peaked in 2020. You know, the riots were burning bright. It was awesome. And then bars reopened and bills had to be paid and rioters got arrested, and all of a sudden like there was nothing left to steal. And so it pretty much just like fizzled out, and that was it. You know, economic pressures are always going to be king every time. You know, people have jobs, they have mortgages, student loans. The internal divisions certainly help too. You've got the pro-immigration crowd freaking out about Gaza. Jews and Muslims are freaking out, you know, tale as old as time, right? So this kind of like unity just doesn't seem to exist. I mean, they are unified in the sense that they're all like spurging out, but they are not able to have that be absorbed into like a legitimate political machine the way that Democrats seem to be kind of squirming and wanting to happen, right? They just, they don't have it. I mean, even Tim Walz, like I said, he balked on that, toned down his rhetoric. Jacob Frey might drop a freaking F-bomb, but they don't really have the kind of resolve that they need to mobilize in a way that would seriously resist the enforcement of these immigration laws. They just don't have it. They have tantrums. They don't have total war. So they'll posture, they'll protest, it's social media content, maybe they'll start a podcast, but eventually they're just going to submit. Minneapolis was not their Fort Sumter, right? It was just another episode in this long grind of these people eventually just like submitting to the restoration of order. So there's not going to be a civil war. There's not going to be a national divorce. There's not going to be anything like that. And it's reignited a lot of that fantasizing, right? You know, this idea that there's going to be a civil war, national divorce. The national divorce one is something that people on the right tend to talk about more. At least in recent years, they talk about, you know, red states seceding from blue states, carving out this kind of like conservative heartland America away from these like liberal blue coastal enclaves. And then blue cities would be free to collapse into like socialist misery, whereas the heartlands, they would build walls and, you know, revive manufacturing, and it would be perfect. And it sounds perfect when you just like write about it on paper or on Twitter, almost elegant in a way, just like a peaceful parting, a divorce, an amicable divorce, right? Without the, you know, bloodshed of an actual civil war. And all this stuff too is like over culture war stuff, dude. Like, people were willing to like secede from the country over like Aunt Jemima's syrup. It was such a bizarre time. Thank you, Donald Trump and JD Vance, for at least making the sort of political path forward a little bit less insane, even if you do have a lot of people still traveling alongside us that are legitimately insane. But there were even people writing like intellectual pieces about this, like people who are supposed to be smart were writing about this like voluntary split between the country to avoid some kind of like inevitable deeper conflict, which I just don't think is ever, we're just not going to see that. And people think that disagreeing with the likelihood of that means that you're just like a coward, like you don't have what it takes to be like me. And these are all just like old people, dude. Like, the young generation is not, they may be disgruntled, they may be upset, but ultimately they seem to be channeling that into some kind of like political solution. Whereas, you know, people want to be edgy online and say there is no political solution. It's like, dude, at some point the solution is going to be political. Even if something collapsed, there's going to be a state that comes in to fill that vacuum, whether it's a communist state, whether it's another power coming in, be that China, Russia, or what have you. So yeah, it's easy to talk about when you're literally just like talking about it, but when you get down to like brass tacks, what are you going to do in New York? New York has red rural counties that vote Republican by like 70% or more. Texas, Tennessee, they also have, you know, Austin, Nashville, right? How are you going to like carve that up to these little like micronations? You know, you're going to have endless disputes over borders, water rights, infrastructure. Imagine Los Angeles trying to secede from California. Like, who's going to get the Colorado River aqueduct? Who's going to pay for the highways? These are all questions that would have to be answered by people who seem to only have an interest in this, again, because of like Aunt Jemima's syrup or because of like them being annoyed about like transgender bathroom stuff. It's just completely unserious. It would also be economic suicide, like pretty immediately. Like blue enclaves rely on red agriculture for food, red energy for power, red states relying on a lot of stuff from the federal government for subsidies, blue ports for trade, blue tech for innovation. Like trade barriers alone would crash both economies probably. You'd have inflation spiking, goods are going to grind to a halt. The military reality is even harsher too. Like the federal government would obviously just like never allow this. Lincoln dealt with the Confederacy in the way that he chose to, not just because of a moral opposition to slavery, which, whether he had that or even cared about that is up for debate, I guess you could say, but also because secession, and this is like the real argument, I think, threatened the Union's integrity. Like modern America has a surveillance state that Lincoln could only dream of, right? We have drones, NSA wiretaps, FBI infiltrators. Any serious secession is going to be labeled some kind of like domestic terrorism event faster than you could say Waco or Ruby Ridge, right? And it's also not going to happen in a vacuum. And this is like the real thing. Foreign powers would immediately like align themselves with, say the seceding side, Russia, China, Europe. They would, of course, get involved just as they did in the American Civil War. And you can ask anybody who lived through the fall of the Soviet Union, the collapse of Yugoslavia. Ask them how secession works out. Smaller like ex-Soviet states like Ukraine, Georgia, they just become the playthings of their more powerful neighbors. And war, genocide, economic collapse, that is like the reality of that day to day. And it's bad enough for that time. It was actually bad enough that for a time, many Russians and other like ex-Soviets were admitting to actually preferring communism to what resulted in the aftermath of it. So I don't know, man. I don't understand why we're still talking about this in the Big 2-6, but I didn't know what else to talk about today, so I guess we will. It's just that same form of escapism, right? It's like it's easy for people to pursue this kind of like mental, thought exercise rather than pursue something that's like a real solution. Like the original Civil War, of course, required like regional cohesion, and that just doesn't exist today, There was a South that was unified by obviously heritage, by, economic ties, cotton production. You had the North that was unified by it being the North, by factories, industrialization. The cultures were sort of disintegrating in many cases. But today the loyalties are completely scattered. Everybody culturally is more or less the same. Accents are disappearing. We're all watching the same shows on Netflix, right? You've got the surveillance state, which again is not going to allow anything like this to happen. It's going to prevent your kind of like underground organization from scaling up. Of course, that is the role of it. And so the end result is going to be the same. It's going to be submission or irrelevance, right? Protesters are going to go home. Politicians are going to compromise. The union will stagger on, albeit in a maybe less unified state. But that whole thing, dude, that whole genre of conversation is just a pipe dream. America is too entangled. We are too surveilled. We are too comfortable to ever meaningfully break apart. The left Civil War talk is obviously a bluff. The right's secession talk is obviously just a cope. Renee Bad dying changes like literally nothing in that equation. So maybe it'll be exploited. Maybe it'll be used to animate the left. Again, that was going on Friday. By Monday afternoon, not exactly the same thing. These people are just paper tigers, dude. All of that resistance is hollow. They have nothing. They're not that guy. And whatever started as like a fiery protest against ICE has already just kind of fizzled out into these just like sporadic rallies, just as, history predicted, right? So they want to talk about a big game. They want to talk about civil war. They want to talk about resistance, whatever their base is, these fractured alliances, this dependence upon, the federal system, the media ecosystem. All of that is ultimately going to result into submission to the Donald Trump agenda, as it already is, dude. We're already seeing this. The federal government has demonstrated that they're not going to back down. These people are balking. They're getting tired. So this is a good cause for patriots, I think. Whereas the real Civil War was like a complete bloodbath, right? And it had a sense of, we'll say, a higher stock of people, higher stock of America, and a real unity, all of which we lack today. So any fantasizing about civil war, national divorce, that's just ignoring the practical realities, the economic entanglement, public opposition, all of that, which is just going to make it like literally impossible. So the left is going to get tired. They'll wear themselves out. Trump will simply continue grinding forward because he has the popular mandate, because he has the will of the people, and those people just simply do not have any of that. So any opportunity we have right now is just to like reject all of that and keep doing what we are doing now because it works. People like it, and there's cause for optimism there. So I would say just simply continue doing what is working and stop wasting time fantasizing about what does not work. And the only reason I wanted to have this discussion was to like make fun of how stupid that idea is from the left, and then maybe affectionately encourage the right to spend a little bit less time focusing on those kind of like escapist fantasies, because we do have something that seems to be working. So support that. Support deportation, support legal challenges to these sanctuary policies that enable this kind of chaos, and just reject all the defeatism, reject all the black pilling. We don't need to balkanize. We don't need to secede. We can actually conserve our country. We can actually win. And this kind of like domestic unrest thrives on disunity, right? So we need to actually build coalitions around things that work, such as law and order, as instituted by the Trump administration. So if anything, now is the time to support the federal government. Now is the time to support Donald Trump and show our ICE patriots that we are going to continue supporting them, because the grind is going to favor those who persist. So you can join it, or you can watch from the cuck chair. You can watch from the sidelines. But speaking of joining, I have to tell you, as John Doyle, if you are listening to this right now, chances are you're somebody who is not yet insane in 2025. It's 2026 now. The big 2-6. You're one of like 8 people in the world who is literally not insane. That's fantastic. That's awesome. I'm so excited. I love that for you. I don't even count myself among that. Now, most media today is designed to make you go out on the street and try to run somebody over with your car. And you don't want to do that, actually. You want to just watch the John Doyle Show, hosted by me, John Doyle. So if you want to do that in varying capacities, you want to listen to me tell the truth about America to you as an American, while, being intolerant of anybody who's disagreed with us at any points about anything, I would tell you that you must go to Apple. You must go to Spotify and leave reviews about our podcast on the internet. It's going to be unbelievable, the results of this. And don't act like you have something better to do, because you don't. Again, we live in a surveilled state. I know exactly what you are doing with your 24 hours in a day, and you need to be spending more of those hours per capita and absolutely listening to my podcast on the internet. Also, you can go to BlazeTV, sign up when you use code Doyle, get $20 off. We will be right back to complain about women on the internet. All right, we are back on the John Doyle Show to complain about women on the internet. Now, I will preface this by saying, if I were you, I would, I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek here with our complaining about women on the internet. You have to opt out from the gender wars discourse, dude. Because first of all, I don't even know that this clip is real. Like, I understand that conduct like this definitely happens, and certainly women nowadays are perfectly happy to do things like this, but a lot of this is designed to just get you angry, not even as like demoralization propaganda. I mean, I'm sure that does exist to some extent, but a lot of it is just because they want engagement on social media. And so they will go out of their way to create these like skits deliberately to make you like, what? Did she just do that? I'm going to leave a comment. I'm going to share this. I'm going to give my like intellectual take. You just got to opt out, man. The gender wars discourse has been going on since Eden. At a certain point, you just got to retire it, blow off steam with your friends or something, but we cannot intellectualize every time like a woman gets on the internet and like does something stupid on TikTok for attention. Like, that being said, I do want to talk about this because this is an experience that a lot of young guys are reporting these days about. You go on a date with a woman and she tries to get you to like jump through these hoops about like your politics and whatever. So you may have seen this clip. We will play it again now.
Do you support Nick Shirley?
Do I support Nick Shirley? I mean, yeah, he exposed fraud in Minnesota. I mean, yeah, I support him. I mean, it's pretty impressive to do for a 23-year-old. Why? What do you think about him?
I mean, you just broke into those businesses.
Broke in? That's actually what you think? You think he broke into those businesses?
I mean, did he not?
No. They didn't even spell the name right. They said Quality Clearing Center.
He broke into those businesses and he's pushing a false agenda.
You think he's pushing a false agenda?
Yeah.
Okay, I have seen enough. The reason that women do this, aside from like the actual like act, the reason they post this stuff is because they're trying to portray themselves as being so high status and having so many options that they can actually afford, because they are so desirable, because they're just not like other girls. They can actually sit there and debase this poor young patriot and act as though like putting him through this sort of like litmus test, this performance, this humiliation ritual, is actually like something that they are able to do because they are so attractive and desirable. Now, I personally, I don't know what this woman looks like. Maybe she is actually that pretty. I doubt it though. My advice to you is if you ever find yourself in this situation, just like literally leave. And honestly, if I'm being less charitable, I would say you should probably like say something to her that she will never forget for the rest of her life. Like say something to her that identifies something that she hates about herself. Like just like cut it. Because at that point, there's nothing there anymore. You have been debased. You are being humiliated, for access to just like some like, just, I don't want to be too mean to our 7%ers because obviously we love our 7%ers, but it's just to say it's not even about a political difference. It is that like what is happening right now is she is trying to get you to dance for her like a monkey. She doesn't even know what she's talking about, obviously. The Nick Shirley thing, the Somali fraud, not only is she like completely wrong, whether she's correct or not does not even matter to her. She doesn't care about that. That's not actually a litmus test for her. She is not deeply and morally concerned about your ability to, process the situation with a moral integrity that she's like outlined for you. What that is her trying to humiliate you and prove to herself and prove to her followers on social media that she is so great that she can actually do that. It's not just that you have to be like a handsome enough guy, a nice enough guy, pay for the dinner or whatever. You also have to be submitting to her moral standards because she thinks that she like wears the girl boss pants or whatever. So I haven't been in situations like this, fortunately, because I'm sort of the real article with my politics. What you see is kind of what you get. And typically in my experience, like dating girls who are like libtards, they usually just kind of like put up with it and are maybe even endeared by it in most cases because they hear what I have to say and they recognize it to be just like completely antithetical to what they've been taught to believe about the world. And for some reason, because they're just like a little dysfunctional, that tends to like endear them or attract them in many cases. I was talking to producer Blake about this. He said more or less the same, right? Like, sort of the real article. Like I've never found myself in a situation where a woman ever had to kind of guess what my attitudes are about how the world works.
Yeah, I saw that clip just for the first time just now watching it. I'm impressed with the young man. I was worried that this was going to go poorly and that he was going to cuck or something. But he didn't. He totally stood firm. And I'm interested in watching the rest of that clip, but I'm very proud of his facial expressions were really great. Like, do you even know what you're talking about? You're an idiot right now. That's what he was saying with his face. But yeah, man, in the past, I would say I've dated a couple libtards, but it was never much of a problem. But as an older young man, I would say be very serious about the women you're seeing. Obviously, this guy is dodging a bullet. He hopefully just walks away from that and never speaks to her again. These women are insane. They're a pain in the ass, and they will trans your kid. There's no reason to entertain. Once you figure out that they're libtarded in any capacity, which all women are to a little bit, they're malleable though. If you if they like you enough, they'll just adopt your political ideology hands down. That's the optimal situation, is just meeting a nice girl at church or whatever. People talk about that, but obviously the real world is a little bit different. But if this is a woman who knows who Nick Shirley is and has anything bad to say about him, you run as fast as you can in the other direction after insulting her to her face.
Yeah, what you need to do, by the way, you need to humble these women, dude, because I don't know what she looks like again, but she's probably like a 6, and she's obviously very off-putting because, not everybody's going to be a Victoria's Secret angel, but if you're just like, I don't know, sweet, then that goes a very long way because most women nowadays have been conditioned to be actually very shrill because, again, that's high status. It is low status for a woman to have to be like sweet and caring and, behave like your mother or grandmother would have been trained to behave. I don't want to use the word trained, but you understand what I mean. Like men are supposed to behave a certain way. Women are supposed to behave a certain way. Women nowadays have been taught that it is high status to actually be like a bitch because you can get away with it because you're just like, you don't need a man for XYZ. And because you're so pretty and all these men want you. And so you can like get away with like acting like that. And that is not every woman, by the way. Like, I know we're like shutting out a little bit here, right? There are still like a lot of very sweet women who have been immune to this kind of social conditioning. And so we don't want a black pill because, again, the gender war discourse is completely unproductive. I hate all of it. I think that anybody who meaningfully participates, and myself included, should just be killed immediately. So we don't want to like black pill that much. However, in cases like this, to producer Blake's point, go away. Just get away, dude, because it's one thing. You almost want a woman who has kind of like a liberal sensibility. Like if a woman is seeing like what's going on at the border, you almost want her to be like, wait, but like, why can't we just let them all in? Like, it's almost weird. Like, I would kind of do a double take if she was like, good, keep them out. I'd be like, what? Like, you know, because there's that sort of like empathy that it is more natural to them. However, if they are completely libtarded and are name dropping like Nick Shirley, like, yeah, dude, get out of there and run away. It's one thing if she's like, maybe we should take care of poor people, and you're like, aw. But it's like a completely different thing if she is like militantly subscribed to this like evil ideology, and especially if she's going to try to get you to jump through these hoops, dude, because then there's like nothing you can do. She's totally paused. It's reached critical mass. Just get away. This is not your wife. Just run very far. You know, and to your point too about like eventually they'll just adopt your politics. My high school girlfriend, my first ever interaction with her was me making fun of some stupid like libtard shirt she was wearing in front of the whole class. And I swear to God, everybody laughed. It was like one of those like Tumblr, and then everybody clapped because our teacher just made a comment like, wait, what does your shirt say? And she was like, oh, and she read it. And then I had to be, yeah, because it's not like I made my little comment. Everyone like laughed at her, and it was like, and she fumbled, dude. She wasn't ready. And then by the end of our relationship, she was going to grad parties parroting my talking points about like gay people and alienating her friends. And so you can actually, get them in the right direction. They can't help it. They're just responding to the incentives that are created by society to, parrot certain ideas, to distance themselves from other ideas. But if they respect you, ultimately they will gravitate. That being said, if they're completely paused and like unpleasant, like, this young lady, which again, I don't even know if this clip is real. Don't waste your time. Just run away, because they're just going to ruin your life, and you don't want any part of that. So
yeah, it's tales all this time. Women are supposed to be agreeable. I mean, that's a desirable trait that men want in a woman. And your point about these women are supposed to be a little more empathetic than us, but that empathy being hijacked towards, 60 IQ Somalians is really dangerous. I would just say to the young men, don't settle. Be equally yoked. Very important. Very important to listen to the Lord in that respect. You can find the not libtarded woman. Trust me, it's not that difficult to do. You'll be all right.
Yeah, no, that's very real. I mean, look at the ICE agent, dude, because it's like on the one hand, if you're talking about like women online, you would have guys who are like, why are women in ICE? She should be at home, like, barefoot, pregnant in the kitchen. But like, okay, whatever, dude, you've got this ICE agent. She's out there for whatever reason. And this guy comes up to her and hands her a flower. And she's immediately, all of a sudden, she's not an ICE agent. She's like, a girl again. And she's like, oh, and she does like a little dance, and she's excited because she was given a rose or whatever, which was awesome too, because you saw the reaction of the like liberal protesters, and they were like angry at that. They're like, what? Because they were like so offended by like a wholesome, normal display of like male, female, behavior or heterosexuality that wasn't just like completely either like degenerate or something that was like ad hoc corrupted, like what they do with the 1950s. Like your grandmother was never happy. She was on antidepressants, and she was secretly lesbian, like this, rewriting of history. But yeah, dude, don't be afraid to go out on your feet. Definitely, like, maybe should I tell that story? Nah, we'll save that for another time. Don't debase yourself. You are one of 8 people in the world who's not currently insane. So yeah, do not even like give these women the time of day. Get up, immediately leave, and then you should probably have ready some kind of insult that's going to make her feel really bad about herself, so that she never treats a young patriot like that again, which, maybe you should say, maybe that's not very charitable, but I would argue that we need that, dude. If anyone needs to get knocked down a few pegs, it's like liberal 6s. So just tell her that you think her nose is like really like oddly proportioned or something, dude. That's like their Achilles heel. Women and their noses, they cannot stand it. Sometimes even guys can't stand the way their nose looks. I mean, we
know
have
a little bit about that.
Yeah, we have a buddy who's given me a hard time about my choice to pronounce ICE rather than say ice, and maybe we'll talk about that guy's rhinoplasty. Is that what it's called? I wouldn't know, because I'm a heterosexual male. I don't get fucking nose jobs. But anyway, no, we love him. We won't name drop him. We won't throw him under the bus there. Anyway, if you enjoyed today's show, which I hope you did, I was a little out of it, a little tired today for hilarious reasons. But anyway, if you enjoyed the show, go ahead and leave us those 5-star reviews at Apple, Spotify, where have you. Go to Blaze, sign up, code Doyle, you get $20 off. And we will see you soon. Hopefully something interesting happens, so we don't have to just talk about low-hanging fruit like crazy liberals and women and the overlap between those two categories. So we'll see you on Wednesday. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you. God bless your family. And enjoy the start of your week.